The leader of an anti-Christian organization tells Christians to, quote, stop whining and meet in private homes just like in, quote, communist China. I'm Matt Barber, Vice President of Liberty Counsel Action, and joining me in studio today is Deryl Edwards, President of Liberty Counsel Action. Well, Barry Lynn, who is the president of Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, an anti-Christian organization, has told Vanderbilt University Christians to stop whining about the institution's policy that requires Christian organizations to accept non-Christians in leadership positions and those who are practicing immoral, unbiblical lifestyles like homosexuals, requiring them to be allowed into their Christian clubs. Barry Lynn says that is perfectly permissible and that Christian groups should be allowed to be forced to allow non-Christians into their clubs, despite the fact, Deryl, that the policy of the Christian clubs are very clear that they want Bible-believing people to be members of their club.
Yeah, they do. What's interesting about when Barry Lynn said this, you have to give him credit for being brave enough to say this before the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville. But it seems like he talks about it here. He says, tell them, show your faith and meet students not in a club room somewhere in a university, but in those home churches that kept Christianity alive during the darkest days of communist China. It sounds like Barry would be more comfortable if he was in communist China. He seems to like the way that system worked there. And, Christians, you just meet in your little home churches.
Yeah, that's the left's out of sight, out of mind policy that they're pushing. We see it in practice, with the Obama administration, for instance, as we've talked about on Faith and Freedom before, with their abortion mandate, sterilization, and birth control mandate, part of Obamacare, saying, look, you can have your faith as long as you keep it to yourself or keep it in your the privacy of your home, just like in communist China. Of course, in communist China, they would raid homes, arrest Christians. People would be persecuted and thrown in jail. Something tells me Barry Lynn probably wouldn't have a problem with that either. Many on the left, many of the anti-Christian bigots that we see on the left don't seem to have a problem with that, or with at least forcing Christians to violate the deep, sincerely held tenets of their faith in order to adopt a postmodern worldview that secularists approve.
Well, Barry needs to read up a little bit more on how the church operates in communist China. You're running an organization called the Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. It wouldn't work the same way in China because they don't have a China United for the Separation of Church and State because they have an approved state church. I don't know if Barry knew that or not. Yeah. It's called the Three Self Church. Yeah. And in China, actually, I think there's maybe two. You either meet in that approved state church or you hide out in your home. So apparently, I wonder if Barry wants us to have an approved state church because that's what China has.
Well, every once in a while, liberals will forget themselves and reveal their true positions here particularly on religion. Anti-Christian bigots like Barry Lynn, other organizations like People for the American Way, another anti-Christian organization, anti-theist organization, I guess you would call it. These so-called progressive groups are anything but progressive. They're very regressive, especially when it comes to religious liberty, religious freedom in the United States. That whole part of the First Amendment that says, that people have the absolute right to the free exercise of religion. In this living, breathing era of the Constitution, that's really so old-fashioned, as Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg recently said, when putting together telling folks in Egypt, as you develop your Constitution, I wouldn't look to the United States Constitution because it's so outdated and old-fashioned. I guess the First Amendment being, the primary aspect of the Constitution that is outdated in the minds of progressives.
I'm also amazed at Barry's brazen "stop whining" comment.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking, isn't that what King George basically said to the colonists to stop whining? Yeah. And in turn, they were like, no, we want true freedoms. We want true religious freedom. And a phrase like that is almost like, so you lost some freedom. So we don't care too much about the First Amendment. Just stop whining about it. Yeah. But no, that's what we fought for, is that very type of freedom.
Well, I've put it this way before. When it comes to the left, tolerance is not a two-way street. It's their kind of tolerance for whatever they feel like needs to be tolerated, and it's a complete intolerance for any traditional values, traditional family values, certainly any biblically based values. Those, this notion of separation of church and state, which has been completely turned on its head, essentially says just that, what Barry Lynn is advocating here, that Christians be forced out of schools, out of any public forum, into their own homes, for now at least, where they can believe within the confines of their own home, whatever they want to believe. But you just wait until the first lawsuit is filed against a Christian club trying to meet in their own home when homosexual activists want to come in and infiltrate the home and push their radical agenda.
Or maybe what they're teaching their children in their own home. We already have problems with that now. Homeschooling movement or whatever, that we know how are parents teaching their children, they're not following it. I mean, you can go back to the case we talked about before a couple of weeks back where the mother who packed a lunch for her child from home, that was deemed to be not meeting government standards.
Right.
So the idea that you're safe in your home is not necessarily true.
No, it's not, and we see more and more that the left has infiltrated the public school system, and they are pushing out any opposing viewpoint. We see this here in Vanderbilt, which is a private university, but certainly anybody that holds an opposing viewpoint to and doesn't toe the progressive line that says that all morality is relative, anything goes, if it feels good, do it, particularly when it comes to the issue, for some reason, of the homosexual agenda. That's the one, the head of the spear that they seem to push first and foremost. Also, unfortunately, at NRB, Mark Potok, who is the director of the Southern Poverty Law Center, was a participant in this debate too. Not surprising. This group that has in the past advocated genuine civil rights in terms of here they are advocating the violation of civil rights that universities and people be allowed to violate, particularly Christians' civil rights. So as we've seen over and again, the Southern Poverty Law Center has completely sold out on this progressive agenda and has cast aside their advocacy for true civil rights and instead has adopted the progressive party line that pushes homosexual agenda, pushes all of these leftist socialist agenda, and really is on the attack when it comes to religious freedom.
Isn't that the group that's quick to label people hate groups
Yeah.
and have a hate list if you don't agree with their agenda?
Yeah. It seems pretty hateful to me to demand that Christians, quote, stop whining and return to their homes to where they can hold their sincerely held religious beliefs for the time being. But again, it doesn't surprise me that groups like Americans United for Separation of Church and State are partnering with other radical left-wing extremist organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center. Then you take again in the full context of that with what President Obama is doing now, the most anti-Christian president that we have ever had in office, pushing these official government policies that are clearly unconstitutional, clearly violate the First Amendment. But that doesn't matter. Progressives will not be stopped in trying to implement their secular socialist policies.
Shouldn't Barry Lynn, as president of the Americans United for Separation of Church and State, been the first one to say, Mr. Obama, hands off the churches because you need to be separate from them?
Yeah.
I don't remember hearing him saying anything complaining about the Obama administration policies.
Of course, and we'll talk about later in the week probably as well, the President Obama has now started an official campaign policy where they're African-American churches around the country. They're encouraging them to get involved in elective politics, which of course, from my perspective, is perfectly fine. But we don't hear Barry Lynn, we don't hear People for the American Way, screaming from the rooftops, separation of church and state. When it's a church pushing their radical leftist agenda, they seem to have no problem with it. It's only when it is our Christian churches that actually believe what the Bible says, that actually embrace biblical truth. Anytime those churches get involved in elective politics, of course, they lose their collective noodle. Well, folks, to learn more about Liberty Counsel, go to lc.org or give us a call at 1-800-671-1776 for a gift. We will send you the Pray and Vote bumper sticker. It says Pray and Vote, and with the Liberty Counsel website, lc.org. Again, give us a call, 1-800-671-1776. Ask for the Pray and Vote bumper sticker. Give us a call today.